The fox woman's teeth clicked together mid-sentence. Vulpine don't get cold, and he smirked, pulling his hood tighter. Yeah? Doesn't look like it, lady. If you enjoy heartwarming sci-fi tales of humans and aliens finding connection in the coldest places, don't forget to subscribe for more HFY stories every day. White swallowed everything. The tundra stretched endless and merciless, a horizon of frost and silence. The storm clouds were already crawling down from the northern cliffs, promising hours, maybe days, of whiteout. Ryan trudged through it all, his breath turning to mist, boots crunching in the fresh drift. He was used to this kind of isolation. Out here, in the frozen frontier of Norval Ridge, solitude wasn't punishment, it was peace. But that peace cracked the moment he spotted a splash of color against the snow. A tangle of crimson and brown lay half buried near the edge of a frozen stream. His first thought was an injured animal. His second, when it twitched and cursed under its breath, was something far stranger. A woman, not human, not quite. Pointed ears tipped with frost, a thick tail trembling beside her, and eyes that flashed like molten amber even through the storm. Her breath came ragged, and one gloved hand clutched a snapped fishing spear. Ryan stopped a few meters away, blinking snow out of his lashes. You alive there? The fox woman turned, teeth chattering. Of course I am. Vulpine are far more resilient than humans. Do not concern yourself. Didn't ask for your species resume, Ryan said dryly. You look like you're about to fall over. Her name was Visara, and she had, as she quickly explained, merely slipped while securing a catch. The catch, as it turned out, had been a single frozen fish, now lying uselessly under several inches of snow. Ryan stood there with his hands on his pack straps, listening to her deflect every question he asked about her condition. Her fur-lined cloak was soaked through the shoulders, and the chill had already turned the damp fabric stiff. You got a camp nearby? He asked. Visara's ears flicked in irritation. I can handle myself, human. He nodded slowly. That's not what I asked. Her tail lashed once, defensive, embarrassed. I was going to find shelter shortly. Right, Ryan muttered, crouching to check her gear. The backpack's fasteners were snapped, a cooking pot half buried beside it. Looks like your shortly better be now. When he straightened, she was trying to look regal, as though she hadn't just been caught wobbling on her feet. Her golden eyes narrowed. You think I need help? No, he said evenly, pulling a thermal tarp from his pack. I think you'll freeze before you manage to light another fire. Big difference. She opened her mouth to protest, but he'd already started moving. Come on, he said over his shoulder. There's a rocky overhang half a click west. You can argue with me once you're not turning into a fox cycle. Visara sputtered, tail puffing indignantly, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. She followed. They trudged through the rising wind, heads bent low, the world reduced to swirling white. The storm was moving faster than Ryan liked, the gusts biting deeper, the horizon vanishing in waves of sleet. He glanced back every few steps to make sure she was still behind him. She was trying hard to keep pace, refusing to show weakness, but her legs were shaking by the time they reached the shelter. It wasn't much, a shallow cave pressed into a cliff face, but it broke the wind. Ryan dumped his pack and kicked snow from the entrance, motioning for her to come inside. She hesitated until the next blast of cold forced her decision. Once they were inside, he worked by habit. Gloves off, lantern on, kindling out. Visara crouched a few feet away, still clinging to her pride as fiercely as she clutched her tail. Her ears twitched toward the crackle of the growing flame. You're quiet, Ryan said, striking a match. I'm watching your primitive methods, she replied coolly. Humans are so tactile. Yeah, well, tactile keeps your fingers attached. He leaned closer, feeding the small flame until it caught the wood with a satisfying whoosh. Warm light spilled across the cave, washing over her face and the droplets in her crimson hair. Her expression softened slightly, just for a heartbeat, before she caught herself. Thank you, she said, quietly, as if the words were foreign. Ryan gave her a side glance. You sure you're all right? That cloak's soaked through, she straightened. I told you, Vulpine are adapted to the cold. He gestured toward the ice crystals forming on her sleeves. Adapted doesn't mean immune. She huffed, curling her tail around herself like a makeshift blanket. Humans are fragile. We're not the same. Maybe, Ryan said, leaning back against the rock wall. But I've met stubborn ones on both sides. That earned him a small glare, and maybe beneath it, the faintest flicker of amusement. They ate in relative silence, sharing heat from the fire and trading small talk between the crackle of burning wood. Outside, the wind began to scream harder, snow pelting the mouth of the cave. The storm had arrived early, fierce, and unrelenting. Visara's ears flicked toward the noise, her tail tightening around her knees. "It will worsen before morning," she murmured. "We may be trapped here through the night," Ryan nodded grimly. "Then we better make the best of it." She glanced over at him, uncertain. Humans always say things like that, as though discomfort is optional. He smirked, rolling out his sleeping gear. "Nah, it's mandatory. We just complain about it creatively." That earned him a reluctant smile, small but real. And as the night deepened, and the wind howled louder, Ryan realized the cold didn't bite quite as sharply anymore. Not because it was warmer, but because there was someone else there to share it with, even if she'd never admit she needed it. The next gust of icy wind slammed against the cave mouth, scattering embers and forcing Ryan to his feet. Outside, the world was disappearing into white. Inside, Visara's cloak was steaming faintly as it dried by the fire, but her tail was still trembling from the chill. And he had a feeling this night was far from over. The fire held, though the storm outside had no intention of relenting. Ryan stoked it with a careful hand, watching the way the light flickered across Visara's face. Her damp cloak was spread near the flames, steam rising in thin wisps. Beneath her outer layer, she wore a thick undertunic of woven synth fur, clearly designed for warmth. Though right now it seemed to be failing her. Her tail flicked occasionally, betraying what her words wouldn't. "You needn't stare," she said without looking at him. "I'm not," Ryan replied. "I'm assessing hypothermia risk." She shot him a glare that could have melted the ice outside. "I am fine." "Sure," he said, dry as the snow wasn't. "And I'm a solar-powered penguin." That earned the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth, but she masked it quickly, drawing her knees up closer. "You find humor in everything." "Out here?" Ryan poked the fire again. "You kind of have to. The wilderness doesn't do mercy." Visara tilted her head, considering him. "And yet you help a stranger you've never met. That doesn't sound like wilderness thinking," he shrugged. "I've seen too many bodies frozen halfway home. Didn't plan to add yours to the collection." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The wind howled louder, forcing them both to lean closer to the warmth. Snow spilled through a crack near the cave's mouth. Ryan got up to wedge a tarp over it. "You're prepared," she noted, watching him work. He grunted. "Experience. Experience with storms? Or with reckless women found face first in the snow?" Ryan laughed, glancing over his shoulder. "You'd be the first one with ears." Her ears flattened slightly at that, though her voice softened. "We Vulpine don't usually travel alone. I thought I could, well," she looked away. "The river ice broke sooner than expected. My camp flooded. So you decided to go fishing anyway? I was hungry." Ryan leaned against the wall beside her once the tarp was secure, studying the faint tremor in her fingers. "Next time, maybe skip the fishing contest with Mother Nature." "I said I'm fine," she repeated, though her teeth betrayed her with another chatter. He sighed, rummaging through his pack until he pulled out a small, flexible pouch. "Here, what's that?" "Heat pack. Snap it like this, shake, and it'll stay warm for hours. I don't need—" He tossed it gently into her lap before she could finish. "Congratulations. You own one now." Visara scowled, but curiosity won out. She snapped the capsule and blinked when the pouch began to heat in her hands. Slowly, she pressed it to her chest fur, a soft sound escaping her before she could stop it. Ryan pretended not to notice. "You're annoyingly competent," she said finally. "Been called worse." For a while, they sat in relative silence, the fire snapping between them. Outside, the blizzard raged like an angry beast. Inside, warmth bloomed gradually, fragile but real. Visara eventually broke the quiet. "Do you always travel alone?" "Mostly. Easier that way." "No one waiting for you to return?" He hesitated. "Not anymore." She didn't push, Instead, she nodded once, quietly respectful. Vulpine usually travel in pairs. We claim solitude as a strength, but… Her voice trailed off, lost in the firelight. It is lonelier than I imagined. Ryan looked at her then, truly looked. The proud tilt of her chin, the fine tremor in her tail, the way she tried to wrap herself in dignity to hide the cold. It was familiar in a way he couldn't quite explain. The same defiance that made people survive where they shouldn't. He smiled faintly. Guess we've got that in common. Visara's gaze lifted to his, the firelight catching in her amber eyes. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed distant. Then another gust screamed through the cracks, scattering ash and reminding them both where they were. Ryan covered the fire with his palm for protection, cursing softly. She flinched at the noise, hugging her tail tighter. It's getting worse. Yeah. He checked his wrist gauge, temperature dropping fast. If it hits -30, even the fire won't keep up. Visara frowned. We will endure. We'll try, he corrected. That's not the same thing. The snow hissed against stone, the sound like static. Their makeshift shelter groaned faintly, the edges of the tarp rattling with each gust. He added another log to the fire and sat back down, the exhaustion of travel catching up to him. Visara's eyelids were drooping, but she fought to stay upright, refusing to look vulnerable. Her ears twitched each time he moved. You can sleep, Ryan said quietly. I'll keep watch. She blinked at him. You would stay awake? Someone's got to make sure we don't wake up as ice sculptures. Her expression softened, just slightly. You are strange, human. Been called worse, he said again, and that time she smiled fully. He leaned back against the rock, letting the fire's glow warm his hands. The blizzard roared, but it was a distant thing now, a sound beyond their small island of warmth. Visara's breathing evened out beside him, her tail uncurling slightly as she drifted toward sleep. Ryan's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned to the fire. He muttered to himself, half amused, half resigned. Yup, definitely gonna regret being the nice guy when I'm out of firewood by morning. The flames cracked, throwing sparks toward the cave roof. Snow pounded the cliffs like a drum, and yet, inside, something gentler stirred between them. Not warmth exactly, but the quiet trust that only comes when two stubborn souls realize they're safer together than apart. The storm deepened into a steady roar, shaking the mouth of the cave until flakes of snow sifted in like dust. Ryan leaned forward, shielding the fire with his hand as another gust rattled the tarp. The flames guttered but didn't die. He let out a slow breath and looked over at Visara. She was awake again, eyes half-lidded and drowsy, but still refusing to let herself relax completely. Her furred ears twitched toward every sound, the faintest tremble still running through her shoulders. You should get closer to the fire, Ryan said. I'm fine, she murmured, though her voice cracked with the word. Sure you are. He scooted slightly to the side, patting the warmer patch of ground near him. Come on, fire won't bite. Her eyes narrowed. You humans always assume I need help, he interrupted, smirking. Yeah, I'm weird like that. Visara hesitated, tail curling tighter. The heat of the fire must have been tempting. Her skin still held the faint, damp sheen of half-dried snow. Eventually, she gave in and inched closer, muttering something about stubborn humans. Ryan handed her a mug of lukewarm brew from his thermos. Here, it's not fancy, but it's warm. She sniffed it suspiciously, then took a cautious sip. Her eyes fluttered half shut. It tastes earthy. Compliment accepted. She glanced sideways at him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. You tease too much. Helps keep spirits up. It's working, she admitted quietly. For a while, the only sounds were wind and crackling wood. Outside was chaos. Inside was small, fragile calm. Her tail had relaxed somewhat, spreading near her feet. In the flickering light, the fur shimmered like living copper. Ryan leaned back against the stone wall, rubbing a hand through his beard. You really travel out here alone? She nodded. I'm an explorer. I chart migration routes for my people, usually farther south, where the snow doesn't reach the sky. Her expression softened into something wistful. But I wanted to see the northern ridges for myself. Foolish, perhaps. Not foolish, Ryan said. Just ambitious. Visera tilted her head at him, ears perked slightly. And what of you, human? What drives a lone hunter to wander where few can breathe without freezing? He thought for a moment. I guess I like knowing I can still survive. Out here, it's simple. No deals, no lies. Just weather and willpower. Her tail flicked thoughtfully. You sound like one of us. He chuckled. Guess I'm flattered. Another gust slammed into the rocks, shaking their shelter. Visera flinched, then quickly massed it, sitting straighter. Ryan noticed the way her soaked sleeping rolls sagged near the wall, the insulation glistening with ice. He frowned. That thing's useless, he said. You won't last the night in it. I will, she said stubbornly. No, you won't. Her ears flattened at his tone. You'd rather I take yours then. Leave you to freeze while I sleep comfortably. Ryan zipped open his sleeping bag and shook his head. Nope, I'm saying we share it. Visera blinked, then froze, ears shooting upright. We what? Share it. It's big enough for two if you stop hogging all that first base. The expression that crossed her face was nothing short of scandalized. Humans are indecent creatures. Yeah, well, indecent or not. I'm not letting you die to prove a point. He gave her a grin that was all warmth and exasperation. Either we both use it, or neither of us does. Visera opened her mouth, closed it again, and stared at him for a long moment. The firelight made her blush obvious even beneath her pale fur. Finally, she let out a small breath, almost a sigh. You are impossibly stubborn. Thank you, he said, feigning pride. She gave him a glare that didn't quite hold, then looked toward the storm outside. Her tail flicked nervously before curling around her legs. Very well, she muttered at last, but only until dawn. Ryan smirked. Deal. He unrolled the sleeping bag beside the fire, shaking it out and patting one side invitingly. She hesitated a long time, then crawled in carefully, muttering something under her breath in her own language that probably wasn't a compliment. Ryan slid in beside her, leaving as much space as the cramped bag allowed, which wasn't much. Their shoulders brushed. Her fur was cold against his arm. He felt her shiver once, then exhale slowly. Better? He asked softly. She didn't answer right away, then quietly. Maybe. The wind screamed outside, but the sleeping bag grew warmer, the firelight pulsing against the cave walls. And for the first time that night, Ryan felt something like peace, unexpected, fragile, and alive. Visera lay stiff as a board beside him, her every muscle telegraphing tension. Even bundled up in the sleeping bag, she acted as though this were a duel of honor rather than an act of survival. Ryan, trying not to laugh, tugged the zipper higher to seal in the warmth. You know, he said, voice low and teasing, you don't have to look like you're about to be executed. Her ears twitched against his cheek. This is unconventional. Unconventional's just a fancy word for smart when it works. She huffed, a small puff of fog in the cold air. Humans are strange. You make jokes at the edge of death. That's kind of our thing. The wind wailed through the cave entrance again, but the sleeping bag trapped their combined heat quickly. Beneath the outer chill, warmth began to build, slow and steady. He could feel her shivering ease with each passing minute, her breathing slowing from shallow tremors to measured rhythm. She shifted slightly, muttering something about his shoulder being entirely too solid. Sorry, he said, amused. I didn't bring the Deluxe cushion model. Her tail twitched beneath the fabric, brushing lightly against his leg. He froze, not wanting to spook her, but she seemed too drowsy to notice. Her pride, however, remained intact enough to grumble. Don't make this weird. You're the one kicking me with a tail, he replied. That is involuntary, she said, voice muffled by the hood of the bag. Ryan smiled in the dark. Sure it is. They lapsed into silence again. The fire crackled, the storm raged outside. Inside, a small oasis of breath and heartbeat. He could feel how cold her skin still was, her fingers icy where they brushed his sleeve. He shifted, careful not to wake her, and draped one arm over her shoulders to share more heat. She went still for a moment, but didn't pull away. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The noise outside became a dull hum, replaced by the rhythm of her breathing and the soft flick of her tail against his leg. He thought about how absurd it all was. a human explorer and a proud vulpine charting her migration routes, meeting by accident in a frozen wasteland. Of all the ways to spend a winter night, this one had to top the list for sheer improbability. Ryan? Her voice came suddenly, quiet and hesitant. Yeah? She paused long enough for him to hear the flick of her ears. Thank you. He smiled in the dark. For what? For ignoring me when I insisted I didn't need help. Well, he said, grinning faintly, I told you humans were stubborn. Her answering laugh was small, but warm, the kind that came from someone not used to laughing at all. The sound filled the small cave more effectively than the fire. They stayed like that for a long while, saying nothing more. The snow beat futilely against the rock, trying to claw its way in, but the world inside the sleeping bag grew soft and quiet. Her breathing slowed even more until it fell into the steady cadence of sleep. And then, as if some instinct decided comfort required ownership, her tail wrapped lazily around both of them, a living sash of warmth sealing them together. Ryan blinked, then let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, he murmured. Real involuntary, huh? He lay there, listening to the wind fade into background noise, the fire dying to embers. Visara's head rested against his chest now, her ears brushing lightly against his chin. Every now and then, a low vibration rippled through her body, almost like a purr. He stared, up at the cave ceiling, wondering how in all the frozen hells this had become his night. Still, he didn't move. Outside, the storm howled like a thing alive. Inside, two unlikely travelers slept cocooned in a single breath of warmth, the night guarding them both. Ryan woke before dawn, though the world outside still looked like midnight. The storm had spent itself, leaving only a muffled quiet and the occasional drip of melting frost from the cave roof. The fire had burned to orange coals. He exhaled and felt the faint warmth still trapped inside the sleeping bag, heavy and alive around him. Then he realized why it was heavy. Visara was practically wrapped around him. Her face rested against his shoulder, nose buried in the fabric of his coat. One arm was slung over his ribs, and her legs were tangled with his. But the most impressive part was her tail. It had coiled around them both several times, like a living rope, soft fur pressed against his chest and arms. Each slow breath she took made it tighten a little, instinctively protective. Ryan lay still, staring at the ceiling, half amused and half at a loss for words. Huh? So that's new. Outside the cave, the snowlight had shifted to a pale gray. The storm was gone, leaving the horizon calm and glittering. Inside, though, it felt like they were still suspended in the same fragile warmth as the night before. Visara purred softly in her sleep, a quiet vibration that buzzed against his chest. It was so subtle it could have been mistaken for a snore, if not for the faint rhythm. He smirked. Guess you do purr, he murmured under his breath. She stirred slightly, shifting closer, her ear brushing against his jaw. Ryan froze, resisting the urge to laugh. Every movement threatened to wake her, but he couldn't exactly breathe freely either. Her tail had him pinned like a seatbelt made of velvet. Minutes passed in that half-dream stillness, until she finally gave a faint sigh and blinked herself awake. Her amber eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then suddenly widened as realization hit. What is this? She squeaked, bolting upright halfway before remembering she was still inside the sleeping bag. That only made things worse. She fell back on him, her tail pulled tighter, trapping both of them again. Ryan couldn't hold back a grin. Morning! Visara's fur stood on end, her ears flushing dark red. I must have, this isn't... He lifted his hands in mock surrender. Hey, I didn't do anything. You wrapped us up like a burrito in your sleep. Her eyes darted down, and she saw how her tail had wrapped multiple times around his torso, the tip flicking lazily as if refusing to let go. Mortified, she yanked at it. Nothing. The fur cinched tighter, as though determined to keep him close. Stop laughing, she barked, cheeks burning. I'm not laughing, he said, very obviously laughing. Her tail twitched again, and she buried her face in her hands, with a muffled groan. It's instinct. When Vulpine feels safe, our tails, wrap around warm things automatically. I didn't mean... Safe, huh? Ryan interrupted, voice gentler now. Could be worse reasons to hug someone. That froze her more effectively than the cold ever had. She lowered her hands slowly, her expression softening, the embarrassment melting into something uncertain. You're not upset? Upset? You kept me from freezing solid. I'm grateful. For a long heartbeat, she just looked at him, ears low, eyes wide. Then, almost inaudibly, she said, "You really are impossible." "Yeah," Ryan said. "So I've heard." Her tail finally loosened its grip, though not entirely. It stayed curled loosely around his waist, as if it didn't quite trust her words. Visara pretended not to notice, focusing intently on brushing snow off her tunic. He reached for the fire, tossing in another small log. "Storm's over," he said. "Sky looks clear. We'll head down the ridge once you thaw out." "I am thawed," she said defensively, though her ears twitched with every word. "Sure," he said. "And that tail totally isn't hugging me again." Her tail flicked, betraying her. She turned away sharply, muttering, "You talk too much, human." "Only when it gets a reaction." Visara made a sound halfway between a growl and a sigh, but couldn't hide the faint smile tugging at her lips. She stood and stretched, the morning light catching the streaks of red in her hair. Her breath misted in the air, her eyes glowing faintly gold as the sunlight touched them. Ryan watched her a moment longer than he meant to. Maybe it was the quiet after the storm, or maybe it was the way she looked more alive than she had the night before. Whatever it was, it made him grin. "You know," he said, "for someone who swears she doesn't need help, you make freezing to death look awfully graceful." Visara blinked, then rolled her eyes, cheeks warming again. "And you make insolence sound like charm. Then I'm doing it right." The snow outside glittered as the first beam of sunlight broke through the clouds. Visara's tail brushed lightly against his hand as she stepped past him toward the cave entrance. Hesitant, almost accidental. He didn't pull away, and she didn't either. Ryan followed her to the cave entrance, where pale light spilled across the snow. The storm had buried everything in smooth, untouched drifts that shimmered under the morning sun. Steam curled from their breath as they stood there, quiet for a while, taking in the calm after the chaos. Visara lifted a hand to shield her eyes, tail swaying lazily behind her. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Almost makes you forget how close that storm came to killing us." Ryan smirked. "I try not to take it personally when weather tries to murder me." She huffed a small laugh. "You're a strange man, Ryan." He shrugged, shouldering his pack. "And you're a strange fox. Guess we're even." Her ears flicked toward him at that, and she gave him a sidelong look, pretending to be unimpressed. "Foxwoman," she corrected. "Right, sorry. Didn't mean to disrespect your professional title." She elbowed him lightly, though there was no real bite to it. "If you keep teasing me, I might change my mind about traveling together." Ryan blinked. "Traveling together?" Visara tilted her head as if the idea had only just occurred to her. "You said you were heading south to the valleys, yes. My research route overlaps that region. It would be practical to share the trail. Temporarily." "Practical, huh?" Ryan grinned. "Not because you enjoy my company or anything." Her tail flicked sharply. "Don't push your luck." They packed up the last of their camp in companionable silence. The air smelled clean and sharp, snow crunching underfoot as they stepped out into the open. The wind had gone still, leaving the world hushed except for the sound of their boots and the swish of her tail brushing against the snow. Visara walked a few paces ahead, confident again now that she wasn't half frozen. Her fur caught the sunlight in streaks of copper and gold. Ryan watched her for a moment before speaking. "So what exactly are you researching out here, besides creative ways to get frostbite?" She threw a glance over her shoulder, smiling faintly. "Migration patterns. My people have always followed the northern herds during the thaw, but we've lost the old routes. The records are incomplete." "Sounds like a big job for one fox woman." Her smile dimmed slightly, though not in sadness, more in thought. "Someone has to do it. I like being out here. It's quiet, honest." Ryan nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, the snow doesn't lie." That earned him another small glance, so brief it might have gone unnoticed if he weren't looking. As they trekked down the ridge, the sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the white. They reached a frozen river where shards of ice had piled against the rocks, remnants of the storm. Visara crouched to examine the cracked surface, tracing the patterns with one claw-tipped finger. She was so focused she didn't notice him watching her again. The quiet concentration, the way her ears flicked with every tiny sound. It reminded him of why he'd stopped when he first saw her in the snow. She looked fragile back then, almost breakable. But now, in the light, she looked alive in a way that made him forget how cold it was. Visera straightened suddenly, catching him staring. "What?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just checking if your tail's planning to attack again." Her tail immediately puffed out in embarrassment. "It was instinct," he grinned. Sure. Warm instinct, maybe. I can't complain." She sputtered, completely thrown off guard. You didn't mind?" He shrugged. "Could have been worse ways to wake up." Visera's ears went bright red again, and she turned away fast, pretending to study the snow. "You're impossible." "Yeah," Ryan said, laughing under his breath. "Heard that one before." For a few steps, silence hung between them again. The kind that wasn't awkward, just soft, thoughtful. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again, voice quiet enough that the wind nearly stole it away. "When I woke up," she said, "I thought you'd be angry." "Why would I be angry?" Her tail flicked low, brushing the snow. "Because I crossed a line. My kind doesn't usually touch others unless we mean something by it. It was thoughtless." Ryan slowed a little, his tone gentle now. "Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. You were freezing, remember? We survived. That's what counts." She looked back at him, eyes bright and unreadable. "Still, I'm not used to anyone saying that." He smiled softly. "Then maybe you've been hanging around the wrong people." For once, she didn't argue. Her ears lowered slightly, her expression softening into something open and uncertain. Then she looked away, muttering, "Maybe I have." The sun climbed higher, and their shadows stretched out together across the snow. They walked side by side, neither quite meeting the other's gaze, but neither moving apart either. Ryan adjusted his pack strap and glanced at her again, just as her tail brushed lightly against his leg. This time, she didn't pull it away. By midday, the storm was only a memory. Thin clouds drifting across a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Their path wound along the edge of a frozen valley, the air crisp and still. The quiet between them had shifted. It wasn't strained anymore. It was the kind of quiet that let them breathe without having to fill it. Ryan walked a few paces ahead, scanning the horizon through his visor. "If we make it to the next ridge before dark, we'll find a proper shelter. There's an old research cabin up there." Visera adjusted the strap of her pack, her ears perking at his words. "A cabin sounds civilized. I was beginning to think humans preferred caves. Only when we're lucky enough to find one." He shot her a grin over his shoulder. "Besides, you didn't seem to mind last night's accommodations." Her tail twitched. "That was survival, not comfort." "Comfort looked a lot like you snoring into my jacket." "I did not snore." "Sure didn't." His grin widened. She muttered something in her language that sounded suspiciously like a curse, but her tone was soft, playful. When he offered a hand to help her across an icy patch, she took it without hesitation this time. Her claws pricked lightly against his glove before slipping free. They climbed for hours, following the sun as it arced toward the western ridge. The snow thinned near the cliffs, revealing frozen moss and black rock. A river glimmered below, frozen solid except where the current still whispered beneath the ice. Visera stopped to catch her breath, eyes tracing the ridgeline. "You've walked these lands before," she said. "Every winter for the past 5 years," Ryan replied. "Mapping, hunting, sometimes just walking for the hell of it. Guess I like knowing I can still survive without anyone's help." Her ears tilted toward him. "You remind me of home. My people say independence is proof of spirit, but..." She hesitated. "Sometimes it just means you have no one left to depend on." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. "You lost someone." She nodded slowly, snow crunching beneath her boots. "A partner. We were charting routes together. He fell through the ice 2 winters ago." He didn't speak for a while. The only sound was the wind brushing across the ridge. "I'm sorry," Visera smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "He used to say I was too proud for my own good. He was right." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "Pride's not a crime. Sometimes it's what keeps us walking." "Maybe," she murmured. "But it's heavy to carry alone." He glanced at her, then at the horizon ahead. "Well, you're not alone right now." That simple statement hung between them, quiet and solid. She didn't answer, but her tail flicked once, a small, grateful motion that said enough. They reached the top of the ridge as the sun began to fade. Sure enough, the research cabin stood half buried in snow. A squat metal structure with a broken antenna jutting from the roof. The door creaked when Ryan shoved it open, releasing a puff of dust and stale air. Inside was dark, but intact. A rusted stove, 2 cots, and a table littered with old data pads. He set down his pack and turned to her. Better than a cave, huh? Visera stepped inside, brushing snow from her cloak. It will do, but next time, I choose the destination. Ryan laughed. Deal. They got the stove running, fed it with a few spare fuel cells, and soon the cabin filled with a dull, steady warmth, the kind of warmth that seeps into the bones. Visera shed her outer cloak, steam rising from the melting frost. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she tried to tame it with her claws. Ryan found himself watching the way the firelight danced on her fur, then quickly looked away before she noticed. Too late. You're staring again, she said flatly. Just making sure you're not turning blue. I'm fine. She paused, then added quietly, Thank you. Again. For everything. He leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. Don't mention it. No, I mean it. You could have left me there. I don't do that, he said simply. Visera's ears lowered, her gaze softening. That's why your kind survives, I think. Humans never walk away, he smirked. Sometimes we trip over our own kindness, but yeah, something like that. Silence stretched again, comfortable and warm. She looked at him for a long moment, then tilted her head. You must be tired. Exhausted. Then sleep, she said. My tail promises to behave tonight. He chuckled, moving to his cot. Tell it that, not me. Visera gave him a tiny grin before curling up on her side of the cabin, tail coiled neatly around her legs. The stove flickered, the light soft and orange. Ryan lay back, watching the faint glow reflect off her fur. Outside, the night was calm, no howling wind, no storm, just the steady rhythm of shared breath in a tiny forgotten cabin. He didn't realize how deeply he'd missed that sound until now. Before sleep took him, Visera's voice drifted softly through the dim room. Ryan? Yeah? If the next storm comes, we'll share the bag again. He smiled into the dark. Guess I'll hold you to that. Her quiet laugh answered him. Then the cabin went still except for the soft hum of the heater and the faint contented swish of a foxtail brushing against the floor. The next morning broke quiet and silver, with sunlight spilling through the cracks in the old cabin shutters. Ryan woke to the smell of something faintly sweet, berries cooking in a metal cup near the stove. Visera was crouched beside it, humming softly, tail swaying behind her in slow, content arcs. For a moment, he just watched her. The warmth of the cabin, the sound of her humming, the way her hair glowed in the dawn light. It felt surreal after the chaos of the storm. He could have sworn the world outside had never been this calm. You're awake, she said without turning. Her ears twitched in his direction. Good, I was starting to think humans needed more hibernation time. Ryan sat up with a yawn. You cook, tease, and insult me before breakfast. You're recovering fast. That's how you know I'm feeling better. She turned, handing him a steaming tin cup, filled with some kind of makeshift porridge. It's not elegant, but it's food. He took a cautious bite, then nodded appreciatively. Tastes better than most field rations I've had. Her ears perked slightly, pleased. It's a vulpine recipe, frost grain and wild fruit. Helps against the cold. Ryan grinned. Guess that explains how you were planning to outstubborn the blizzard. Exactly. She looked smug for all of 2 seconds before softening again. Though I'm glad you were there anyway. They ate in silence for a bit, the stove clicking gently. Every now and then, her tail would flick against the floorboards, lazy, almost rhythmic. It filled the space the way conversation didn't need to. When they were finished, Ryan stood and stretched, looking toward the open window slit. Clear skies again. We'll have a smooth trek south if we leave soon. Visera nodded, though her gaze lingered on the mountains beyond. It's strange, she said quietly. Before the storm, I only thought of how far I needed to go. Now I can only think of how close we came to not going anywhere at all. Ryan chuckled softly. Perspective has that effect. She smiled faintly. Humans and Vulpine aren't so different, are we? Not when we're freezing, he said, half laughing. That made her tail flick against his boot. Deliberate this time. You make a habit of joking through serious moments, don't you? It's a defense mechanism. Keeps me from thinking too hard. Well, she said softly. Then maybe I'll let you keep it. They packed slowly, neither rushing. The storm had left the world cleaner somehow, the air sharp but not hostile. When they stepped outside, the sun caught the snow just right, scattering light in every direction. Visara stopped beside him on the ridge, her breath forming soft clouds. Where will you go after the valleys? Haven't decided, Ryan admitted. Maybe west. Maybe I'll just follow wherever the trail feels right. She gave him a sidelong look, amused. Humans call that wandering. Vulpine call it exploring, he countered. That earned a grin. Touché. They started down the slope together. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say. Every step left matching footprints in the snow, one pair slightly larger, one with faint claw marks at the tips. When they reached the valley floor, the wind picked up again, not cold this time, just moving, alive. Visara pulled her hood up and glanced over her shoulder at the mountains. Do you ever wonder, she said, how many people walk this same path and never met each other? All the time, Ryan said. Guess the world's big enough to make luck feel personal. She smiled quietly at that, tail curling once before brushing his arm as they walked. Not by accident, not instinct. Just a soft, steady motion that said, I'm still here. As they followed the river bend, a small flock of silverbirds took off from the trees, their wings scattering light through the air. Visara stopped to watch, eyes wide, her face soft in the glow. Ryan slowed beside her. You've seen plenty of those before, right? Yes, she said. But somehow it feels different this time. He tilted his head. Different how? She looked at him, long enough for the silence to stretch between them again. Warm and steady. Because now, she said simply, I have someone to point them out to. Ryan didn't reply right away. He didn't need to. The look on her face said more than any joke could. So instead, he just smiled, tucking his hands into his jacket pockets as they kept walking. And when her tail brushed his again, curling for half a heartbeat before slipping free, he didn't laugh or tease her this time. He just walked beside her, matching her pace as the snow glittered underfoot. For once, the world wasn't trying to kill them. It was just quiet, peaceful, and that, Ryan thought, felt like the rarest thing of all. By the time the sun started dipping behind the mountains, the sky had turned into a watercolor of gold and pale rose. The snow reflected every shade of it, painting the landscape with soft fire. Ryan and Visara moved in easy rhythm now, no longer two strangers forced together by bad luck, but a team. He'd fallen into her pace without realizing it, and she no longer pretended she didn't notice when his shoulder brushed hers. They found a small ridge overlooking the valley and stopped to rest. Ryan dropped his pack and sat on a half-buried rock, sighing contentedly. You know, he said, I've crossed this region a dozen times, never stopped to appreciate how quiet it is. Visara stood beside him, her fur catching the amber light. That's because you were always alone, he smirked. And you're saying you improved the scenery. I'm saying you improved mine, she replied, before she could stop herself. Her ears twitched as she realized what she'd said, but she didn't take it back. Ryan chuckled softly. Guess we're both bad at pretending now, she smiled, lowering herself to sit beside him. Perhaps that's an improvement. They sat there together as the light faded, the silence stretching comfortably between them. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the snow falling gently now, a few flakes catching in her hair. Without thinking, Ryan reached out and brushed one away. Visara's ears tilted forward, and she blinked at him. You're bold, human. Just practical, he said, keeping his tone casual even though his pulse betrayed him. Couldn't let frostbite claim your ears after all that bragging about cold resistance. Her tail flicked once, then curled lightly around his boot. Then you should stay close, to make sure I survive. Ryan's grin softened. You planning another storm? She shrugged lightly, gaze drifting toward the horizon. Storms always come eventually, but I think they're easier when you know someone will pull you out of the snow. He studied her profile for a moment, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips, the way her golden eyes caught the last slant of light. Then, quietly, "You don't have to go south alone, you know." Her ears perked, and her tail gave a slow, almost shy sway. "Are you offering companionship or protection?" "Whichever one convinces you to say yes." That earned him a laugh, real and bright this time. "Humans," she said softly, shaking her head. "You win arguments by refusing to stop talking. Works more often than you'd think." The last of the daylight faded, leaving them bathed in the soft blue of twilight. They made camp near the ridge, not bothering with the tent this time. The night was calm, the air still, and the stars glittered sharp and endless above. As Ryan lit a small fire, Visara curled beside it, tail looped around her knees. "You ever get tired of the cold?" she asked. "Every day," he said, smiling. "But it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not." She tilted her head. "You talk about it like it's a person." He poked the fire. "Maybe I've just spent too long talking to things that don't answer back." "Then maybe," she said, voice softer now, "you finally met someone who will." The words hung there, delicate as falling snow. He looked at her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked between them, throwing flickers of orange light that reflected in her eyes. Finally, Ryan leaned back, resting his hands behind him. "You know, I think your tail's trying to start a conversation of its own." Visara glanced down. Her tail had quietly wrapped itself around his ankle again, the fur brushing his boot. She let out a quiet groan. "It has a mind of its own, I swear," he smiled. "Guess it just likes the company." This time, she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Together, they watched the stars blink alive one by one, their reflections scattered across the snow. After a long while, Visara broke the quiet. "When the thaw comes," she said, "and the herds move again, maybe I'll map the routes closer to your side of the mountains." Ryan turned his head, a small smile ghosting across his lips. "Yeah?" She nodded once, her tail brushing lightly against his hand. "Just in case another storm decides to test your stubbornness." "Guess I'll have to be ready then," he said, his tone easy but warm. The night settled around them like a blanket, the world quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of her breathing. Her tail shifted once more, curling loosely across both their laps, and she didn't move it this time. Ryan looked out across the frozen valley, then at her again. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think the worst thing about the cold was how it reminded you you're alone." "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm starting to think it's not so bad, if someone else is there to feel it with you." Visara smiled faintly, eyes half closed, the firelight painting gold across her fur. Then maybe the cold did something right for once. They sat together until the fire burned low, wrapped in warmth that had nothing to do with heat. And when sleep finally came, her tail found him again. Instinct or choice, he couldn't tell. He didn't mind either way. Because in that silent, starlit wilderness, two solitary souls had found something rarer than shelter. They'd found each other. If this story warmed you up even a little, hit subscribe. And if you'd like to support more tales like this one, consider buying me a coffee at the link below.